Welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Samuel. I'm the superintendent of schools. And our meeting today takes place on the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian and Smolik speaking peoples. It is indeed a pleasure to work, live and play on this land. And I too take the responsibility to learn more and more about the land of which I work and live. And I'm going to be part of the next book club here, which is going to be discussing Indigenous rights. And that's being facilitated by our Lori Berger, who works from the Indigenous Education Department. And so tonight we have Brittany Verissimo is our acting director, acting secretary treasurer, and she has a presentation to share with us. And we will get started. Brittany. While we're waiting for Brittany, Louisa Sanchez is one of the trustees. She sent her regrets that she could not attend.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. So tonight's meeting is the first ABC meeting. It's the information and discussion of resource pressures and budget priorities. And I'll pass it off to Andrew to go over the strategic plan.
So tonight, what you're hearing is the
Yep.
presented. We have somebody joining us online. So our everything that's done with our budget is done with a view towards the strategic plan that was developed 2 years ago with the board. And that means that we have a select set of priorities that were to provide us with direction on how we resource our schools and what we focus on in moving forward. So equity is, of course, a very, very big part of our world this year and as previous years. Equity in literacy and numeracy is very important. And so therefore, working with the Indigenous Education Department, we do a lot of work with our teachers and with our staff to ensure that we have equitable transitions and equitable achievement. As well, we have truth and reconciliation. We have Lori Berger does a lot of good work leading truth and reconciliation work in the district. And of course, mental health literacy is not only a big priority for our board, but also within the province of British Columbia. And it is work that's done in every school to ensure that not only staff are healthy, but also to maintain positive and healthy relationships for all of our students in the work that they do as students. Great.
Thank you, Andrew. So tonight we're just setting the stage for budget priorities and how we balance the budget. We're not looking for any decisions tonight. We're just providing information to get the process started. So this is our agenda and I'll just quickly go through it. So Andrew just went through the strategic plan priorities. Next, I'll go through the budget timelines, the ABC meeting dates, 10-year enrollment trends. Then we'll go over the 23-24 revenue and expenditures and the amended budget comparison. Next, we'll go through the budget pressures and reserves available, then the possibilities and next steps. So first we'll go through the budget timelines. So as you can see, we're working on budgets almost all year, other than in the summer when we're doing our year-end audit. And at this time of the year, we're actually working on 2 budgets at once. The current year-end amended budget and next year's preliminary budget. You're likely familiar with this timeline now, as I've gone over this a few times over the last year. So I won't go into a lot of detail again tonight. Instead, I'll just give a quick overview. First, I'll go over the 23-24 amended budget timeline, which is the top portion. Typically from October to January, we're working on the amended budget of the current year to review and amend our preliminary budget to reflect the September 30th student count, current staffing, and any events that impact the budget. In December, we received the ministry funding announcement. Then from January to February, we finalized the amended budget and discussed this with the Board of Education. Then the board provides their 3 readings and we submit the amended budget and bylaw to the Ministry of Education and Child Care by February 28th. Next, we'll go over the 24-25 preliminary budget timeline, which is the bottom portion. The preliminary budget is the 24-25 budget we are setting the stage for tonight. Typically in January and February, we are planning for the next school year already. This includes input received from the board, staff, partner groups, and public. In March and April, we present our budget assumptions to the Finance and Building Committee, the board, and staff for review and input on significant budget contractions or expansions. Between May and June, the finalized budget is presented to the board for 3 readings. This is the planned budget consultation meeting approved by the board. Again, tonight's meeting is presenting information and discussion of resource pressures and budget priorities. When I go through these meeting dates again later on, I'll go through the individual meetings in greater detail. The next few slides, we're going to provide some information to set the stage. The obvious starting point is enrollment, as it drives the bulk of revenues and expenses. Looking at this chart, you can see that our enrollment has been relatively stable for the last 4 years. One of our first steps is determining what enrollment looks like for next year. Next, we will show you a few pie charts to show where our revenues and expenses come from. You can see that the bulk of our funding is our operating grant, which comes from the government. Often when we're trying to balance the budget, suggestions are made to increase revenues. But the reality is that these types of revenues, such as rental income, is a very, very small part of our income. Here you can see that most of our expenses are salaries and benefits. Again, when we're trying to balance the budget, people tend to focus on supplies and services. However, there is a very small portion of our budget. This slide gives you an idea on where the salaries and benefits are being spent. Here you can see where the supplies and services are being spent. Again, this is just to give you context on where our budget is being spent. 23-24 amended budget comparison. This is an overview of our operating revenue and expenses for last year, as well as our current year preliminary and draft amended budget. The first column is our prior year actuals. The second column is our current year preliminary budget that we put together last spring. And the third column is our current year draft amended budget.
I'll just speak a little bit to the change. If you look at the far right column, we're looking at this point, and we're pretty close to done the amended budget. We're looking at a $505,000 deficit for this year. That sounds large, but if you look at the 22-23 year, if we had not drawn from reserves, we would have had a very similar deficit last year. But we did use some internally restricted funds as well as some reserves to help balance it last year. One of the things that really hurt us this year was that we had, in the preliminary budget, we showed an actual decline of enrollment, which meant the funding protection money that we receive, and Brittany will talk a little bit more about it later on, would have stayed stable. So instead, our enrollment actually went up about 20 students, which means any grant money we got from there was, for the most part, offset by a reduction in our funding protections. So a net change of quite a few I think we budgeted for, I can't remember the number we budgeted for a reduction, but we had a net increase of 20, but essentially got next to no additional funding for that. So while we had to add staff to cover those students, there was no additional funding. You could see in our operating grant, we only have a net increase of about 60,000 when we should have seen about 500,000. So that was the biggest hit to the budget, was losing that money. And when we do the amended budget presentation, we'll actually go through each line here and go through some detail explaining the change from the preliminary budget to the current year, or the amended budget. So we'll have more detail then. This is just to give you an idea that 505,000 becomes our starting point for seeing what next year looks like. Thanks, Brittany.
Thanks. So yeah, like Jerry said, this just becomes our starting point for where we're at financially for next year. So before we look at any cost pressures for next year, we will need to address this structural shortfall. So budget pressures. Now that we've set the stage, here's some of the budget pressures for next year. Again, we want to mention that this is just a start and there may be more. First on this listing is the structural deficit of about 500,000 that we just showed you on the previous slide. In addition to this, we expect there to be a decrease in remaining funding protection of about 111,000. For those of you that aren't aware, and a reminder for those that are, funding protection is an additional amount provided to protect districts against any funding decline larger than 1.5% when compared to the previous year. For districts where funding declines more than 1.5%, funding protection will provide additional funding in an amount that ensures the year-to-year decline is no greater than 1.5%. So you can think of funding protection like a top-up to regular enrollment funding that decreases in subsequent years. Our decrease to remaining funding protection is estimated to be about 111,000 for next year. Next on the listing of budget pressures is inflation, which is currently at about 3%. Next is local capital purchases of vehicles and equipment. In the current year, we didn't include these in the budget. However, we recognize that there is a need for these purchases and we'll need to consider adding these to the budget next year. Next on the list is enrollment. Enrollment is the biggest driver of our revenues and costs. Any change in that will impact next year's budget. IT upgrades and ERP system upgrades are going to be necessary sometime in the near future. Reserves available. As we look at our finances for next year, it's important to look at what reserves we have available. Part of what we're looking at is our unrestricted surplus of about 237,000 available as at June 30th, 2023. We also have 1.055 million available from our reimbursement of PRMS project planning costs. This brings us to a total of about 1.292,000 of reserves currently available. After deducting the estimated amount of 505,000 for the current year shortfall, we estimate to have about 787,000 in reserves at the end of this year. Our board policy is to have between 2 to 4% as a contingency. This would be about 500,000 to 1 million. Again, these are not actual figures presented on this slide as we are still in the middle of the year. These are just estimates at this time. This information is setting the stage for further discussion and providing you with information you need to make informed decisions. Possibilities. Next, we'll briefly go over a very short list of areas where we could see possible savings or increased revenue. First on the list is special purpose funding. We will be taking a closer look at our special purpose funding available to us and determine if we can reallocate expenditures out of operating costs and reallocate them to special purpose funding. Another area that is a possibility is an additional revenue source from property development and rental income. And of course, the biggest area to consider is potential reductions. Next steps. Here's a schedule again for the annual budget consultation meeting dates that were approved by the board. Again, tonight's meeting was just to present information and discuss resource pressures and budget priorities. The intent was to set the stage for further discussion and to provide you with information you need to make informed decisions. The next meeting is a public meeting on February 15th at 7 p.m. This is when we will have individual presentations from the various partner groups. Then on April 2nd, we will have a working session with the board, senior staff, principals, and vice principals to discuss potential budget changes. Then there will be a public meeting on April 8th at 7 p.m. where we will report back on input received, ministry funding, and proposed budget changes. What's not included in this listing is an opportunity for public input. We'll have talked with the partner groups, but not with the public yet.
Yeah, and one of the challenges with this and what some districts, including this one, has done in the past is sought input through surveys, online surveys, or getting people together and strategizing about where to cut money and those sort of things. These are often disingenuous because you can almost predict what's going to be said. It'll be reduce class sizes, add more special needs funding, reduce administration, and it's not very helpful. And for the most part, nothing happens with the input that's received. So I find what's better to do is have more of an information session to let the public know what's going on, why there are funding pressures, and it also leave room for questions and for input from the public in that kind of a context. But to just put a survey out and ask for where they want to see cuts made does not provide useful information. So what we're looking or thinking about is that possibly another meeting somewhere in March or early April. Can you put the ABC schedule back up? And so this would be for the board's discussion is to maybe in March, it looks like, to have an opportunity to speak with the board or to speak with the public about what the budget challenges are, why Prince Rupert School District is having these budget challenges, and then seek some input that way, but provide them a little bit of background information on what the current situation is, similar to what we've done here, but in a slightly different format. So we'd be open to hearing people's thoughts on that.
Well, for someone who doesn't live in town, Jerry's pretty close on the ball about what he said. Who hasn't seen our process in operation that well. So he's right in that every time that we've presented out and then asked for input back, again, it's exactly like he said, it's not stuff that you can often change easily. I agree that we're better off to present information and say what's going to happen and then present something to the public and do feedback that way.
Any further questions or comments?
I'll go again if everybody else is going. So, funding protection decreased this year of 111.
Yes.
Is that less?
Or sorry, for next year's.
Sorry, that's what I meant. Sorry. Is that less an amount? That seems to me to be a lower amount. Is that because that's finalizing? Is that what's happening?
That's the last of it. That's the last of it.
That's a different amount, yeah, because it's been much more than in the past.
Yeah, it's been up over 500,000.
And then the reimbursement of Prince Rupert Middle School funds that we've spent so far, is that a proper, or is that something you're going to talk about another time, or?
That's from the prior expenses.
Yes. Is that a for sure, at this
Yes.
point? Yeah, that's why it's in there like that? Okay.
Yeah, so for a lot of people, over the 10, 11 years that we were required to invest a certain amount of money to get the new school going. So we had to do a number of studies on a variety of things. And so now that money, now that the school has received ministry approval, the money is coming back to us. Not all of it, but 80% of it is coming back to us.
So we were really tight on our budget last year. The board voted to have a really tight budget. In other words, spending at the higher end of the suggested amount, right? You agree with that statement?
Yes.
Yes. Would we be better off now to not be quite so aggressive? I would have said that was aggressive. but that's just me saying that.
Yeah, I think we're only in really our 5th month of school.
Yeah.
So I think some of what Brittany and Jerry are presenting tonight it's preliminary. We don't know what our year end will be yet, but I'm a bit cautious on, we haven't done a lot of consultation. We've just started talking about our staffing needs for next year. And a lot of this will come together more in April, May.
In April, May, yeah.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. And then the other one, I'm still at the floor. The other one that I noted was possibilities. Can you bring the possibilities chart back up there? Because I had a question on that. A closer look at special purpose funding means what exactly?
So we're just gonna, take a closer look at special purpose funding, just to see if there's anything that we can include that's currently in the operating budget and reallocate it.
Oh, I see. The switch it between where it's being spent from.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's my only question. I was wondering what that meant, whether it meant more funding or just a different way, which is what you're talking about. How we're doing it. Yeah. Okay.
Good
Thank you.
question.
And I have trustee Meyer.
Yeah, I just had a question on the middle school rebate or, money back that we got. I was under the impression that it had to be put back into capital. Does it all have to be put back into capital, or will we be able to delegate that somewhere else?
I can answer that one. It's a kind of we've actually consulted the KPMG as well as we're waiting for an answer back from the ministry on the actual accounting for it. But it is surplus funds. So even if it has to go into capital as surplus capital, all the board has to do is make a motion to bring it into operating reserves. And you can do that. It's not restricted in any way at this point because essentially the money's already spent. So at worst, you have to do a motion to transfer out of capital. So it's definitely money we can use.
Perfect. Thank you.
I do have trustee Horn. Is there any other trustees prior? All right.
I'm gonna have one more after trustee Horn.
Thank you, Christy. I've been very loud here. So that's the exact question there. The spending that we did came out of our regular budget.
Yeah.
In all that effort, so that's why it's more likely is easily returned back to operating budget.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Trustee Meyer?
Oh, it's left me. 1 second, it's going to come back. I started thinking about the unrestricted budget. For funding protection, so we have approximately 111,000 left in funding protection. And am I right to assume that if our enrollment increases for next September, then we get no more extra money until we surpass that 111,000, right? And then after that, that's when we would see actually more income for more students. I just wanted to make sure that I understood that correctly.
That's correct.
Okay.
If our enrollment dropped more, such that our funding dropped more than 1.5%, we would actually increase the amount of funding protection money we get. But I don't think we're looking at that. We're looking at a stable enrollment for next year. So,
yes, as much as more funding would be great, we want more enrollment so that as we grow, we can have more money and be able to do more with it.
Yes, it would be lovely to see the end of funding protection.
Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
Trustee Horn?
So if our enrollment does not change, in the following year, we're doing the budget for next year, starting in September. The following September, there'll be no funding decrease, no funding protection decrease.
2025.
20, yeah. Is that true?
So
Should
for
I-
25, 26. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah. If we use it all up next year, then we're done. We're no longer beholden to the ministry.
Thank you.
You paid the last balance on the credit card. Think of it that way.
Been a long time. Any other questions?
Yeah. See no more hands?
Questions are open to anyone other than trustees as well. Okay.
I think I just want to reiterate what Brittany said, that we tried to present some information that can start everybody kind of thinking about what's necessary for next year. So hopefully there's, starts germinating some ideas. I mean, the bulk of it's going to come from Andrew and his team in trying to identify areas where we can either generate revenues or make some reductions, but it's good for everybody, partner groups as well as the board to be thinking about that in the next number of weeks.
And I would just love to offer that if our consultation looks different this year, as what Jerry suggested, it still very much so is consultation though as well, and we definitely want to hear from all of our partner groups and community. That is the purpose of public education. Is that complete for this
I
evening?
think that's it.
Wonderful. I would love to thank you all, and then I'll pass it over, and thank you for your presentation, Brittany, and thank you for your information, Andrew, and thank you so much, Jerry. And on to you two.
Great, thank you very much, Chair Toy, and that's all we have. Check our school website, any announcements will be made there. That's where we keep the community up on things that are happening, such as announcements for meetings like this. So please continue to visit our school district website and social media. Brittany.
I think that's it. Just thank you for taking the time out of your evening to join us tonight.
Very much so.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.